Thank you, Mr Deputy Speaker, for calling me to speak. I'm always reminded of the benefits of mindfulness when I listen to the member for Monmouth and follow him. Wales, as we know, has a very proud history and tradition, but in thinking about the debate today, I've decided to focus my remarks on the future, and particularly the role of young people in Wales, and especially close to home in my constituency of Cardiff Central. Cardiff is projected to be one of the UK's fastest growing cities, with a 26% population growth over the next 20 years. And I represent a university constituency in our capital city, and I'm very proud to do so. There are a very small number of university constituency members in this House, and I'm also very proud that the majority of them sit on this side of the chamber, and I think there's an obvious reason for that, which I'll come to later. But Cardiff Central contains the campuses of no fewer than 3 excellent universities: Cardiff University, Cardiff Metropolitan University and the University of South Wales. Cardiff University is in the global top 100 universities. Cardiff Met is continuing to increase its strong international reputation, and USW is now the second largest university in Wales in terms of student numbers. Many academics and students from other universities also choose to make Cardiff their home, contributing to Cardiff Central having the second highest proportion of residents aged 16 to 24 in the UK. 40% of our city's population holds tertiary level qualifications, and we have 75,000 students in the city region, which amounts to half the student population in Wales. There are 43,000 students alone in Cardiff, most of them living in Cardiff Central. Postgraduates now make up more than 1 in 3 students studying Cardiff's higher education institutions, and international students make up a quarter of those studying in Cardiff. The first university in Cardiff was founded in 1884 with only 13 academic staff and 102 full-time students. But what has been developed and built over the past 134 years, not just in terms of expanding campuses, but in terms of knowledge, skills and the Welsh economy, is a wonderful achievement. I'll give way, of course.
I thank my honourable friend and neighbour for giving way, and she's making an absolutely excellent point. Indeed, many of the staff and some of the students, not as many as her own constituency, also live in my constituency, and I'm very, very proud of the role that universities play in Cardiff. Would you agree with me it's a really important thing that we saw so many young people, and indeed lecturers and staff from Cardiff universities turning out to protest against the extreme far-right neo-Nazi actions that we regrettably saw in my constituency over the weekend? To have that solidarity across Cardiff was a powerful thing to behold, and I'm sure should join me in welcoming it.
Absolutely, I thoroughly endorse what my honourable friend says, and we know that when those incidents happen in Cardiff, which sadly they do from time to time, the whole community turns out in support of our fight against it. And when I walk through Cardiff Central past neoclassical buildings of Cathays Park, or the modern striking architecture of the University of South Wales, or Cardiff Met, those buildings are a striking reminder that our universities represent both our openness to ideas and our promise to future generations. And how we value and treat our universities and those who work and study in them says a lot about our progress on those fronts. And topically, the last month has seen the biggest ever industrial action undertaken by the University and College Union in defence of the University Superannuation Scheme, and proposals by Universities UK to change the scheme. Those changes would mean a reduction of £10,000 a year in pensions for the average university academic. Cardiff University UCU members voted overwhelmingly to take industrial action, easily seeing off the restrictions in the mendacious Trade Union Act introduced by the government. And Cardiff UCU, through a very effective campaign and with a perfectly reasonable and justifiable case, have seen their Vice-Chancellor, who is also the head of Universities Wales, eventually peel away from the hardcore of Vice-Chancellors who were opposing any return to the negotiating table, and a fresh, independent look at the pension fund valuation that had been undertaken by Universities UK. But this dispute, which I mentioned, which has hit Cardiff University, is a consequence of the government's marketisation of higher education. In the government's rush to ensure that universities are run like private businesses, lifting the cap on tuition fees and treating students as customers, the balance sheet has become king. And it's the balance sheet that will allow vast borrowing to expand campuses and capacity. And as we have seen in the private sector, employees' pensions are always an easy target when you're trying to smarten up your balance sheet. But what's the point of glossy prospectuses and a shiny new building if you can't attract the best people to teach and do research within them. If Brexit wasn't enough of an unnecessary threat, we don't need to turn the brightest minds away from a career in our universities in Wales, teaching the next generation of engineers, doctors, teachers, business leaders, and yes, maybe even politicians, by making those careers less attractive through slashing university pensions. As Anthony Foster, the Vice-Chancellor of Essex University, has said, and I quote, "University employers must step up to the plate and commit to increasing employer contributions to the scheme. Principled compromise is the answer." But going back to the issue of how we value and treat our universities in Wales and those who work and study in them, government higher education policy says a lot about its attitudes to young people in Wales. In 2010, the Tory Lib Dem coalition government made it clear what future it had in mind for the next generation when it saddled young people with tuition fees of £9,000 a year, and this was made clearer when the current government replaced maintenance grants with loans. Whilst preaching the virtue of paying down the national debt, claiming this was for their benefit, the UK government devised a system whereby the average graduate would be £50,800 in debt and the poorest graduate an average of £57,000 in debt. And the bankruptcy of this system can now be seen in the Prime Minister's own pledge to freeze tuition fee rises and hold a review. Contrast this with the approach of the Welsh Labour government, which has looked to keep maintenance grants at every stage of further education, from college to the end of university. It has also kept NHS bursaries in Wales, unlike the government here. And Labour's policy has been to ensure that the playing field is kept as even as possible, as opposed to piling the highest amount of debt onto the poorest students. And whilst the Welsh Labour government has not been able to rein in fee rises indefinitely, it has ensured for almost a decade that Welsh students have graduated with significantly less debt than their English counterparts, and they will continue to do so. Of course I'll give way.
I'm very good at Honourable French is making an impassioned speech and obviously greatly informed as well, but the one thing the Welsh Government's also done is worked with students, including the NUS Wales, to get to where we are now with this new programme for students. I think that's very important. We've seen very different contrasts between the British Government and how the Welsh Government works.
Absolutely. My honourable friend is absolutely right to say that, and that permeates so much of Welsh Labour government working through the social partnership with trade unions in Wales on public services and with the NUS in Wales on education. All of this matters because although Cardiff has 3 excellent universities, it also has postcodes and catchment areas that contain some of the highest levels of poverty in Wales. And no child, wherever they live in the United Kingdom, should ever have their aspirations of obtaining a university degree curtailed because of the frightening burden of debt. With the Institute for Fiscal Studies reckoning that 3/4 of our graduates will never pay off their student loan, it is clear we need to end this system which is loading our children's future into a Ponzi scheme. The government's approach to higher education also says a lot about our openness to new ideas and new people, and it's vital that the government listens to the concerns of universities and students rather than dismissing them. Universities and their global connections and collaborations are vital to our knowledge economy. A recent report by the London School of Economics has found that Cardiff University alone contributes £3 billion to the UK economy a year. And every year, international students in Cardiff University generate over £200 million for Cardiff's local economy. Welcoming people from all over the world has long been an integral part of our successful higher education sector, yet our exit from the European Union threatens to compromise that. For all of the government's words, everyone knows that immigration policy is being dictated by what looks good on the front page of the Daily Express or the Mail, rather than the good of the country. The government says it remains committed to the UK and, by extension, Wales, as being open as before. And yet that contrasts with its own stated aim of reducing net immigration to tens of thousands, which, unless it's planning on encouraging mass emigration, will necessitate a large drop in the number of international students. The government's approach to Brexit and to its negotiations has at best been confused and at worst downright hostile. It's already having a detrimental effect on our higher education sector with a fall of applications from EU students to UCAS. And if the government is serious about the UK still being open to new people, it needs to recognise the overwhelming view of the public and drop international students from its immigration targets. It also needs to explain to us and to the Welsh Government how it's going to ensure that academic institutions in Wales and across the UK can still easily attract and recruit European Union academics after Brexit. Literally every week in my advice surgeries, I have constituents coming to see me to ask whether they are going to be able to live, work and travel in and around Europe as they do now. I can't answer those questions, but it seems I'm in very good company, because pretty much every time I ask the Secretary of State for Wales or his minister, they can't answer either. In the last 4 months, I've asked the Secretary of State 8 times whether he can identify and name any specific advantages or opportunities for Wales of leaving the EU, and he hasn't yet given me a single specific, tangible example, and I haven't heard any in the debate today. With our exit less than a year away, this is ridiculous. In contrast, students and academics in Cardiff have been regularly and forcefully telling me how Brexit is harming the horizons of higher education in Wales. Cardiff University is currently part of over 50 Horizon 2020 schemes, and the EU remains a significant investor in Welsh higher education. This funding and the jobs it supports could easily be lost in the car crash Brexit that some members of the government are pushing for. Welsh students are currently able to enjoy the advantages of the Erasmus Plus scheme, along with students from non-EU countries such as Norway and Iceland. And whilst the government has in principle committed to paying into the EU programmes, the lack of detail on the future is deeply concerning. We need clarity now that the government has contingency plans in place for alternative sources of large-scale credit and funding from which our universities have often benefited from. And I'll finish, Mr Deputy Speaker, by just talking briefly about duty. We often speak about duty in this House, our duty to our constituents, our duty to our country, but surely both those duties are not just in the here and now, they encompass the future too. Yeah.